Hello and welcome back to Bestseller Live. I'm your host, Cynthia Johnson, and we have a wonderful three-time author here with us today, Laura Gassner Otting. Laura started her career as a law school dropout to join a presidential campaign. From there, she was appointed by Bill Clinton's White House, where she helped shape AmeriCorps. She became the youngest vice president of a nationally respected search firm and then left soon after to start her own. Laura has become a Wall Street Journal best-selling author 3 times. Her books have been translated into 5 languages, and she has done TEDx and several other stages every single year. We are so lucky to have her. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you for
How are
having
you?
me. I'm great. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. Your books your keynotes are so fantastic. Both. I got caught up on your website for quite some time. I'm not gonna lie. Just watching you on
Well, it's
stage in your
brand new,
wonderful
so I'm really
outfits.
excited. It's a
Yes.
brand new redone website, so I'm glad that you spent some time on it.
Yes. And your books. You have your newest book, which is Wonderhell, amazing title, and your first book, or the one prior, Limitless. They sort of go together, though, right? What inspired you to write both?
Well, so I spent 20 years in executive search, and it was my job in executive search to call the most successful people on the planet and recruit them away on behalf of my clients. So I was calling them because they were super successful. But despite all that success, they weren't very happy. So they all called me back. And when I sold the company that I founded to the women who helped me build it, I was fascinated by this question of why success doesn't bring happiness. And so I started thinking about the handful of people who I wasn't able to recruit away and what it was that they had that everyone else didn't seem to have, and what it was that they had that I didn't have when I dropped out of law school, when I went to the White House, when I left the White House, when I went to the big firm, when I left the big firm to start my own firm, when I sold my firm, right? All these moments were like, on paper, I was successful, but I wasn't happy. What I realized what they didn't have was this thing I call consonance. And that's alignment, it's flow. It's when what you do matches who you are. And we can talk about that in great depth. So what I'll say, the reason I wrote the second book, Wonderhell, is because when Limitless came out, I had absolutely zero platform. I had zero plan. I didn't have a newsletter list. It's not even like I had a small one. Like I literally didn't have one, but I still managed to get it to launch at #2 on the Washington Post bestseller list, right behind Michelle Obama. And I was so exhausted from the effort that it took to get that book launched that I kind of left my humility like in the waiting room of the airplane lounge the flight that I was on heading home. And when my editor, my publisher texted me and said, your book just debuted at #2, all I could think of was like, #2, how do you get to be #1? Right? Like I saw this potential that was out there, and I'd had some success, but I also thought there was more success that was possible. And I was like, how do I do that now? And so it was exciting and it was humbling and it was wonderful. But inside of the bigger goal and that increased hunger and that faster pace was also anxiety and uncertainty and doubt and stress. So it was wonderful, but it was kind of hell. It was wonder hell. And I realized that wonder hell is the space in your psyche where the burden of your potential walks in and is like, hey, what you got for me? Huh? Like, what are you going to do with this newfound potential? And so for Wonderhell, I interviewed 100 different glass ceiling shatters, Olympic medalists, startup unicorns, thinkers, creatives, artists, philanthropies, and everyday people like us, because I needed to figure out a way out of it. And out of that, I wrote Wonderhell, which was my understanding of how we not just learn how to survive these moments, but actually learn how to thrive in them instead.
I completely understand the moment you're talking about, where you're like, I'm another person and my goals are not, they're not the same. What are the first steps, or what are the first steps you encourage people to take in those moments?
You cut out there. I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
What are the first steps you encourage people to take in those moments when they find themselves in their health?
So the first thing that I learned from people who found themselves in Wonderhell, the first thing that they had to do was they had to come to terms with that voice inside their head that was telling them to like wait and pause and don't go forward and maybe hold off for a second, right? They heard this limitation, this voice that said you're an imposter, you don't belong here. And so it's an imposter syndrome feeling where you're like, I'm not so sure. And you hear it as a limitation. But in fact, for every person that I spoke to who thrived in Wonderhell, they were able to turn that limitation into an invitation. And rather than thinking, I don't belong here, I've never done this before, instead, they changed the voice in their head to this very simple mindset shift that made it exciting. I've never done this before. And, everything that I write is based on 20 years of executive search, on decades of research, on tens of thousands of responses for 3 million data points. And yet this is like the simplest self-helpy mindset hack ever, right? It's not, I've never done this before. Ooh, scary, riddled with failure, potential to be embarrassed and finale, right? To I've never done this before, which is exciting and filled with education and adventure and iteration, right? Suddenly it becomes this educational journey. It's fulcrum instead of it being finale.
How because it sounds so great and I'm like, I want to do that. But do you have any examples of
Yeah.
people or even yourself of how it worked and it was successful?
Yeah. So Sally Krawcheck is the founder of Ellevest. And Sally was an exceptionally successful human on Wall Street. She had risen to the highest ranks in the fanciest corner offices of Sanford C. Bernstein, Smith Barney, Citigroup, and fast too, right? Like one day she told me, she's like, Laura, on a Wednesday, I was managing 286 people. And on a Thursday, I was managing 40,000. Like she had to figure this out every single time on her own. But Sally got fired not once, but twice, and both times on the cover of the Wall Street Journal. She was surrounded by men who tended to play a little fast and loose with some of their sort of risk tolerance. Now, Sally at home was a wife. She had some kids. She had some stepkids, and she knew that women tended to make less money. They tended to carry more debt. They tended to take on more unpaid family leave, and they also live 8 to 10 years longer than men. So they've got this longer retirement horizon to think about. And so she was thinking one day while after she'd been fired the second time, she said to me, she's like, Laura, I was leaning into the mirror and I was putting on my mascara. And I thought to myself, 99% of the investment dollars in the United States are invested by companies owned by men, which is why women get these messages that they're either condescending, like, oh, skip the creme brulee latte and you can afford your rent, or like, math is hard, right? But like for men, they get messages like, buy the sports car, right? Get another T-bone steak. And she was really frustrated about this. And she's like, it's because there are no investment banks for women created by women. And she thought, somebody ought to do that, right? And she had never imagined anything like this before. She'd never done anything like this before. But once she imagined it, and she thought, the person who can do that will have to have managed a lot of people. They've have to have been on Wall Street. They've had to have spent time in the most senior rooms. They have had to maybe have endured public failure once or twice. Like, who on earth could do that? And as she's putting on her mascara, that person looked back at her and it was like, it's you. Right. And so once she realized that she was the one, there was a Venn diagram of people in the world who had all of those things, and she was the person in the middle of it. She had to do it. She couldn't unsee this version of ourselves. You know why internal candidates always leave if they don't get the job? The person who has applied for the job, who's already at the organization, has applied, they're a vice president, they've applied for the president position. They get their interview, they're treated well, treated with respect, and they still, within a year, end up leaving. Because the very process of wearing the clothes of that role, speaking in the voice of that role, thinking in the mindset of that role, puts them in their brain in that role. And once they see themselves in this new, bigger way, they can't unsee themselves in this new, bigger way. And so for Sally, as soon as she saw this potential, she imagined herself in that seat, building this investment bank for women by women. She couldn't not do it. She had this burden of her potential that was like, are you going to live up to this person that you've just imagined that you are? And so she could have said, I've never done this, and just said, I'm not going to do it. Or she could say, I've never done this. And so, if we think about imposter syndrome for a moment, the term alone is offensive, right? Imposter, you don't belong, you should leave. Syndrome, there's something wrong with you, you're sick, maybe you should lay down. So unless you're one of those people that suffers from Dunning-Kruger syndrome, right, which is more like the people who have the most imposter syndrome, in fact, have the very least, we've all had those toxic bosses. The people who I spoke to who thrived in Wonderhell were able to not feel that imposter syndrome as a diagnosis, but actually wore it as a badge of honor, which allowed them the space to ask questions, to not have all the answers, to not have everything figured out, to explore what the options can be and not be in this sort of fake it till you make it mode, but actually continue to spend their time in a sort of research and development mindset.
I feel this is the first time someone has explained to me that the being present. They always say be present with what's happening to you, and the way you just explained, I was like, oh, that's what that is. Being present, and really being present with the good and the bad, and being real, understanding where you're at, and then the solution you would what a beautiful way to get out of being stuck, right?
Yeah. And I'll go even one better. Like when I started my career, I was just barely 22 years old and working in the White House, right? I dropped out of law school. I joined a presidential campaign. He made it to the White House. So I made it to the White House too. And most of the other young, bright things in the White House were all, they were super connected. They'd gone to boarding schools and private schools, and they were carrying granddaddy's little satchel with they were just fancy. And I got there through hope and spit and just a whole lot of luck, right? I just worked and worked and worked, and I just kept showing up. And I was literally wearing my mother's 1980s shoulder pad suits. I mean, it was not pretty. And they would all walk in with their Wall Street Journals and their New York Times, and they were highlighted and tattered, and they were sitting right before the meeting was started, and they were writing furiously in their notebooks all their ideas. And I was looking around I have no ideas. I don't know anything. I don't know anything at all. And so I would get out my notebook and I'd start writing things like pick up the dry cleaning and bathe the dog and call your mom, because I needed to look like I was faking it. I was faking it till I fake it till you make it. And what I realized after a while is that all of the time I was spending faking it, not being present, I was actually missing all the conversations that were happening around me, and the way that relationships were being built, and the way that deals were being done, and the way that, people would follow certain people to the elevator just to get that one conversation and ask for an assignment, right? And once I stopped pretending and started being present, that's when I started to grow. That's when I started getting opportunities. And so, I hate this fake it till you make it thing that we tell young people to do, because it really just puts us in this place where we're just missing out on everything. And so even if we do make it, we've made it in something that we're not even sure we know what we're doing. We're just building a house of cards.
Everyone around us can tell.
And everyone around us can tell.
Yeah.
And this is the other thing that I learned with all of these people that I spoke to. I spoke to people that were building their second $1 billion company, right? I spoke to people that were at the top of a ski slope, literally about to go on a run to get a gold medal, when they had a gold medal in their pocket from the day before. And still, both of those people were like, this is it. This is when they figure out I don't belong here, right? If they can have imposter syndrome, surely there's no hope for any of us, right? And we can either hear that as a sentence, you're screwed, or we can hear it as liberation. How amazing. If they don't have it figured out, then I don't have to have it figured out either. It turns out none of us have it figured out. And the sooner we can admit that and just start having real conversations and actually asking questions and learning and growing and iterating and changing, the better we'll all be.
The people you describe, it's hard to imagine being a gold medal winner, but then you look at Simone Biles, and we look at these greats who very openly tore their hearts out and were like, no, it's real. This is real.
It's so real.
And
And, it's like I'm very lucky in that, like, I make my living as a keynote speaker. So I go to conferences, I go to colleges, I go to corporations, and I'm in the green room. I was in the green room with Malala, right? Like, I'm in the green room with amazing people. So when it came time, when I found myself in Wonderhell, I was like, well, I'm going to call some of these amazing people who I've gotten to know in the green room. And I literally, like, I talked to some of the most incredible humans. I mean, I spoke to the first female F-14 fighter pilot in the Navy. I spoke to Sally Krawcheck, who I mentioned, who now has $2 billion of assets under management and that investment bank she created. I talked to Alan Mulally, who saved Ford and the U.S. Motor Company. I mean, I talked to so many incredible people from all industries and all walks of life. And every single one of them told me about doing something they never thought possible. And every single one of them experienced crushing doubt, uncertainty, imposter syndrome, anxiety, envy, exhaustion, burnout. Like, we think success is going to be this like super easy linear path. And it turns out that it is not at all. And it's not at all for any of us. It's just that some of us are dealing with those problems in nicer jets, and some of us are dealing with those problems in, the city bus.
And it depends what day it is.
And it depends on what day it is. Life. I say, like, and it's funny, like when I spoke to Sally, she said, I have family that I had to support also. And I knew that I could be like the best Sally I could be at work, and I could crush it at work. But if I was the best Sally that I wanted to be at home, it would probably crush my children, right? Like, it is hard to have like that kind of all-in driving force all the time. Like, sometimes your kids just want you to love them. She's like, so I decided I would just be normal. I would just be mediocre. I would just be me at home, and that would be good enough. And I was like, I love you. I love you for saying that. Like, thank you for saying that.
That makes me want to take it back a book for you, because limitless life, right? I have 2 young daughters, and I understand the feeling of bringing that personality home, and you're like, wait, who am I? Am I your mother, or am I this other person?
I had a really interesting conversation with my older son around that. He was having some, just like stress around what he wants to do with his life. He's a senior in college, and I immediately went into like LGO coaching mode. And he stopped me and he's like, Mom, he's like, I don't want to talk to LGO right now. He's like, I just want my mom to tell me it's going to be all right. And I was like, oh my God, I'm sorry. Come here. Let me hug you. It's all going to be all right. But, like, I think it's so easy for those of us who can see the solutions to want to just provide the solutions, when in fact, sometimes people just want to know that you love them.
Yeah, absolutely. If we go back to the limitless life, because this is also pre-Wonderhell, right? What are there rules around this? Like, how do we create a limitless life that allows us to love our kids and also be LGO when we need to be?
Yeah. So it's funny because the book is titled Limitless: How to Ignore Everybody, Carve Your Own Path, and Live Your Best Life. And it turns out that if the only part of the book that your kids read is the subtitle, which is How to Ignore Everybody, it's pretty easy for them to ignore all of your advice. When I first went into executive search, I brought with me the definition of success that I was handed when I was younger, right? Which is like the fastest and most expedient path to the corner office is the one that counts. Like, that's success. Best title, best company, best money, etc. And I think a lot of us were handed that definition at some point, whether it was a high school guidance counselor, a college counselor, a career counselor, maybe a friend, a parent, a celebrity, somebody. And when I was in executive search, I used to call candidates and I would listen for like a handful of things. Like, there were 8 motivating factors that would get anybody excited at any time to want to consider taking on a new job. And there were things like, what's the mission of the organization? Am I inspired by the leader? How broad is the skill set I'm going to get? How deep is the impact I'm going to make? Will this organization, this company look prestigious on my resume? Where is it located? What are the benefits? How much money will I make? Right? There were like certain things. And I think a lot of us in the first part of our career grew up thinking that money was the first thing on that list and everything else went from there. But what I realized as I was building these big candidate pools that were gorgeous, robust, diverse candidate pools that would then start to dissipate in the weeks and the months as the executive search went on. What I understood was that I was calling these candidates, asking them to turn their entire lives upside down. And I was coming to them with this checklist, right? And what they really wanted was meaning. And so they were interested because I would hear 1 or 2 or 4 or 6 or 7 or 8 of these things, but I didn't stop to ask them how they prioritized them. So they were interested, but they weren't invested. And it wasn't until I understood that every single one of us at every age and at every life stage is going to prioritize this list differently that I began to understand, how do we define success for ourselves? So for example, it may be that you're at a stage of your life where you want the most prestigious job, you want the biggest title, the fanciest leader, the biggest money. Like that is the part of the career that you're in. Or you may be in a part of your career where you want more flexibility. You want to be able to make sure that you're home every night for dinner. You want to make just enough money, but there's a need to make money, and then there's the want to make money, right? And the need to make money is how much money you need to pay your bills, pay your mortgage, pay for preschool, daycare, whatever maybe a couple vacations a year. But the want to make is how fancy are those vacations? How much money is left over for giving to charity, right? Are you driving a Ford Focus? Or are you driving a Lamborghini? No offense to the Ford Focus people, but right? What does that life look like? And in between there is sort of where you make the sacrifices and decide. But every single one of us is going to have a different definition of success. And I think so often managers and leaders will look at their people and be like, oh, my people are unhappy. Let me press the easy button. I'll give people raises at the end of the year. And then they're like, why is everybody in my office at the end of Q1 still unhappy? It's because that's not the thing that gives them actual meaning in their work. And so not only do all of us have different definitions of success, but each one of us individually will have different definitions at different ages and different life stages. And the thing is, we're given this definition when we're 15, 16, 17 years old. And we don't even have a frontal lobe then. So we don't even have the capacity to make a good decision when we're literally making the decision about the career or the college or the trade or whatever it is that we want to do. And not only that, we never give ourselves the grace to go back and change our mind and change our focus.
And you've done, there's extensive research that you've done around this, right? So you've asked these questions, can you give a little insight into what the research is or was and is now, and then some examples of what it tells you?
Yeah, so we've run an assessment online that we've been running since January of 2019. We have about 10,000 responses from 74 different countries, from every possible demographic and every possible industry. So we have this huge longitudinal database from before, during, and now after the pandemic about what actually excites and engages and inspires people at work and at home. And what we've learned is, first and foremost, it's not the pandemic's fault. Quiet quitting, the Great Resignation, any of this, all of these things, the numbers of what we're seeing about how much people are or not engaged, it's actually pretty much the same as it's been since before the pandemic. And the reasons are pretty much the same as they've been since before the pandemic, except on one particular vertical, which is how much control people actually want, right? So how much are they inspired by the work that they're doing? How connected do they feel to the actual, work that they're doing every single day? Does their work actually matter? Does the work contribute to their life in a way that is actually interesting to them? But control is the one piece that we saw a huge, it went up by 20%. Everything else was sort of up or down by 1 to 3%. Control went up about 20%. And why? Because in the beginning of the pandemic, all of the leaders said to all their workers, just do whatever you can do to keep the ship afloat. Do what you need to do, where you need to do it, how you need to do it. That's cool. Do only what is mission critical. Do only what's necessary, and just get it done. And workers got a taste of having some agency, right? Having some personal agency about what they do, how they do it, why they do it, what metrics they're being reviewed on. And they got rid of all the busy work that didn't matter. And so that's a genie that's hard to put back in the bottle. And so that's the first thing, right? Is that we can't just blame the pandemic for all of, people not being engaged. A lot of those things were there before. The second thing is that we say, oh, well, workers are just failing leaders. All the workers are just quitting. The workers aren't engaged. Well, it turns out that it's leaders who are failing workers. And why do I say that? We know that bad leaders bleed out good people, right? You know, if you're a terrible leader, if you're a toxic boss, your people are going to leave you. So we focused our research specifically on people who say, I work for a quote unquote good leader. And the people in our research who say, I work for a quote unquote good leader, like someone who's done the training, they're well liked, they get, great results. They say, if I work for a good leader, but I don't feel like I personally have a relationship with that leader, they're just as likely to say they're going to leave as somebody who says, I work for a bad leader. So I think that's a super interesting thing, especially when we have this hybrid work environment, that leaders right now more than ever have to make sure that their people actually feel loved and feel seen. And there's a huge difference between being loved and being seen, right? Like loved is you do your job, I give you your payment, maybe you get a raise every once in a while, but being seen is like, what do you actually care about? How do you take those 8 motivating factors and where do you prioritize them? Because maybe if I think that you care about money, but what you really care about is impact, giving you a raise every year is not going to be as meaningful as putting you on the organizing committee of our company's charitable event every year. I don't know. I don't know until I have that conversation with you, but it's a lot easier to inspire your people if you've had the conversation instead of just hitting that easy button that doesn't actually work. And there's so many other things that I could talk about, but the last thing I'll also say is that, we also fall into this, I don't know, a bit of a laziness where we think that, the millennials just want to get trophies for showing up. Gen Xers, they're all checked out. Boomers are feeling, they're not leaving. They want to feel important. And who did I forget? I forgot, well, I didn't forget the Gen Z.
Gen Alpha is the new one, I think. I don't know if they're old
Gen
enough to work.
Right. I don't think we have a lot that's in there, but here's what we Gen Z, sorry. Yeah, Gen Z wants trophies. Millennials want to, they only care about the values, right? But what we found is that every single one of these generations, they all say that they want the same things. They all want respect. They all want to feel like they matter. They all want to feel like they're relevant. Like they all want exactly the same things. And they're all saying that they're willing to do more work if they actually feel like they're inspired by the work, if they feel like they have some say, if they feel like they have trust in the leadership, if they feel like there's some transparency that's there. And so we were, I mean, and there's lots of things where we see differences among genders and among generations, et cetera. But I think those are sort of 3 very interesting sort of off the top data points.
Yeah, and I love that you're not blaming, like the blame game. It's like this existed. It crosses generations. It crosses pandemic lines. This is
Yeah.
So 10,000 people have done this. I know we can get the books and we'll talk about where to get them next. But I'd love to know, can we access the assessment results, or how do we take the test or the assessment?
Yeah. So you can go to limitlessassessment.com. That's limitlessassessment.com. And it takes about 15 minutes to take. It's pretty in-depth, but if you take the assessment, what you'll get is a response that actually tells you exactly where you are excited about your work and where maybe your excitement's flagging a little bit, and what specifically you can do today, tomorrow, this week in your job, in your career, in your company, and yourself to change to actually become much more engaged and much more limitless. And if you do that, you'll also get a copy of the 2022 report, and then you'll get a copy of the 2025 report that we're going to put out early next year.
I love this. That's limitless assessment, right? Is that the
limitless.com? Limitlessassessment.com. Yes. And it's a free assessment. Yeah, it takes about 15 minutes. And like I said, I have about 10,000 responses from 74 different countries, every possible demographic, every possible industry. I've given keynotes about this all over the world, and the great data that we have found. But more so than just me collecting the data, based on everything that we know, we actually give back to you very specific things that you can do to remedy what you find that ails you.
I love that. And I wish we could go on more here. You are such a well of knowledge. But we can't. So the new book is Wonderhell. The previous book is Limitless. Limitlessassessment.com is where we can take the assessment. Where can we find more about you, or if people want to hire you to speak, where can they find you?
Yeah, so my name is Laura Gassner Otting. So lauragassnerotting.com is my brand new fancy updated website, and all my friends call me LGO. So I'm on all the socials as Hey LGO.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here. And we encourage everyone to pick up a copy of either book, Wonderhell or Limitless, and of course to take the assessment. Thank you, Laura, and thank you for joining another episode of Bestseller Live. We'll be back next week with more. Thanks so much.